Imagine living in a time when the slightest misstep could lead to your public humiliation, torture, or even death. In the medieval world, where power and control were maintained through fear, punishments for even the most minor offenses were brutal and merciless. A whisper could cost you your life. The streets were filled with the sound of cries and moans, but not from laughter or joy, only from pain and suffering. Welcome to a world where punishment wasn't just about correcting behavior. It was a spectacle meant to instill terror and remind everyone of the cost of disobedience. From flogging to caning and even the dreaded flagellation, medieval punishments were designed to break the body, mind, and spirit. In today's video, we'll step back in time and explore the darkest aspects of medieval justice, where punishment was often public, brutal, and humiliating. The power of punishment in the Middle Ages. During the medieval period, authority was absolute. Kings, lords, and church officials ruled with an iron fist, and the common folk lived under constant threat of punishment. Whether it was for theft, heresy, or simply a disobedient word, the penalties were harsh, and there was little to no recourse for the victim. It wasn't just about crime and punishment, it was about setting an example for everyone else. Fear was the tool of control, and the more terrifying the punishment, the stronger the deterrent. The medieval period, spanning roughly from the 5th to the late 15th century, was a time when justice didn't have to be fair. It had to be terrifying. This is why some of the most brutal punishments in human history were not only used to punish but also to ensure that everyone in the community knew the consequences of stepping out of line. Flogging, the whip of justice. Perhaps one of the most infamous forms of punishment during the medieval period was flogging. This form of corporal punishment involved whipping the victim with a lash or a cat o' nine tails, a brutal instrument made up of several knotted ropes or leather thongs. The punishment was public and often carried out in the town square, a place where anyone could witness the punishment and learn from it. Flogging could be used for a variety of offenses, from minor theft to religious offenses, and it left the victim with visible marks, sometimes permanent scars. The act itself was intended to humiliate the person, reminding the community of their sins while also serving as a public spectacle. It was a tool of both punishment and shame, and there were no exceptions. The more severe the crime, the more brutal the flogging. Caning, the sting of discipline. Unlike flogging, caning was often used in the schools and monasteries across medieval Europe. It was also a method of public punishment, often reserved for younger offenders or those deemed to have fallen short of society's moral expectations. A person would be struck with a cane, often made of rattan or another flexible material, sometimes in front of an audience to maximize its humiliating effect. Caning was more precise than flogging, targeting specific parts of the body, often the back, palms, or the soles of the feet. The pain was sharp and intense, and because the cane was so flexible, the strikes often left deep bruises or welts. It was not uncommon for victims to walk away in agony, their legs buckling under the strain of their punishment. In medieval monasteries, where discipline was a central part of life, caning became a regular occurrence. Offenders were subjected to it for everything from breaking the silence of the cloister to not following the strict dietary rules. The pain was not meant to just discipline the body, it was a spiritual punishment, meant to break the sinner and remind them of their place in the hierarchy of the church. Flagellation, the pain of penance. One of the most chilling forms of punishment was flagellation, a ritualistic form of self-inflicted punishment that was often sanctioned by the church. Unlike flogging or caning, flagellation involved the victim or sometimes the punishment's executioner, using a whip or a scourge to strike themselves in an act of penance or as a form of penance inflicted by others. While it was practiced by certain monks or nuns as a way to demonstrate their devotion to God, it was also a tool for imposing humility and submission. During the medieval period, Flagellation was performed as a display of religious devotion, often in the presence of others. A public display of someone flagellating themselves, usually in a church or during a religious procession, was intended to purify the sinner's soul through suffering. It wasn't uncommon for individuals to flagellate themselves for hours, creating open wounds on their backs, all for the purpose of showing their remorse. Flagellation in the medieval world was linked to the belief that physical pain cleansed the soul. Whether it was voluntary or forced, the ritual became associated with the most severe types of penance. The idea of self-inflicted punishment as a means to atone for sin was so deeply rooted in medieval thought that flagellation could often be seen as an act of personal salvation. While flogging, caning, and flagellation were all physical tortures, the true power of these punishments came from their public nature. Medieval punishments were designed to humiliate the person in front of the entire community. These punishments weren't just about the individual's pain. It was about making an example of them for everyone else to see. Consider the pillory or stocks, where individuals were forced to sit or stand in a public space, their heads and hands locked in place, while the townspeople were encouraged to throw things at them, insult them, or even abuse them. These punishments were designed to strip away a person's dignity and social standing. The crime, no matter how minor, was turned into a spectacle. It was a method of control, a constant reminder to everyone in town that any misstep could lead to a fate worse than death. In medieval society, reputation was everything. If your name was tarnished by accusations of theft, drunkenness, or worse, your punishment wasn't just an act of retribution, it was an act of social exclusion. The punishment wasn't just meant to be endured physically, but emotionally, as the victim's reputation and standing in society were forever damaged. The public nature of these punishments made sure that no one would forget who had sinned. The psychological toll of medieval punishments. The psychological toll of medieval punishments cannot be overstated. While the physical pain was often intense and long-lasting, the mental anguish of being humiliated in front of an entire town or community could be far more devastating. For many, the trauma of public punishment was something they could never fully recover from. Consider the mental effects of branding. A criminal, especially a thief, might have their face or hand branded with a hot iron, leaving a permanent mark to signal their wrongdoing. It was a lifetime reminder of their crime, a visible scar that would affect their ability to reintegrate into society. This branding was meant to permanently associate the individual with shame. Even after the physical wounds healed, the psychological damage could persist for a lifetime. Publicly branded individuals often found it impossible to secure work or form new relationships. The society they had once belonged to would never forget their sin, and their very identity was altered by the act of punishment. For many, this was the most cruel part of medieval justice. The medieval era was one of fear, power, and control. The methods of punishment that were employed were far more than just deterrence. They were tools of psychological and physical terror. Flogging, caning, flagellation, and public humiliation were all part of a system designed to maintain order and obedience at any cost. And while the methods were brutal and shocking, they were the norm for centuries, ingrained in the fabric of medieval life. Today, we look back on these practices with a sense of horror and disbelief. But the lessons they hold are timeless. It's important to understand that punishment, no matter how severe, does not always lead to justice. True justice involves compassion, understanding, and the ability to restore a person's dignity, something that medieval punishments could never achieve. If you found this deep dive into medieval punishments fascinating, be sure to like and subscribe for more content on history's darkest corners. And as always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. What are your thoughts on medieval justice? Did the punishments go too far? Let us know.